What if I told you that this has so many health benefits that it's considered an S-tier fruit in terms of your health? Food is arguably the most important resource in Age of Empires 2, but all we see in game is just a single set of numbers. Throughout this series, we will be diving in to see exactly what foods each civilization prepared and ate, and how well I can recreate these recipes. This is Meals of Empires. The Persians are one of the oldest civilizations in the Age of Empires 2 franchise, not just in being one of the first civilizations in the franchise, but also one of the oldest civilizations that are featured in the franchise. If that's confusing, let me explain. They originate with the Sasanian Empire from 224 to 651. That's how you do dates when they're really small, you just say the numbers. And they were mainly fighting against the Byzantines until the Umayyad Caliphate, with the rise of Islam, kind of indoctrinated and took them over into their caliphate. And then that continues up until around the 1500 mark, when you have Ismail starting the Safavid Empire, which was a gunpowder empire, and that's represented in game a little bit by Ismail's campaign series, and of course by the unique technology citadels. Today's cuisine will feature many of the Persian ingredients, such as pomegranates, walnuts, eggplant, okra, rice, and pistachios. The meals we're putting together today are Fesenjan, which is a stew composed primarily of pomegranates and walnuts, and we'll be adding some eggplants in there. And then the second one is Khoresh Bamieh. I remember that one this time, which includes mainly okra as the principal component in the stew, but we'll be adding plenty of other savory ingredients in there as well. And when you have two different stews, you of course need your base, and that will be Persian rice, Tahdig, which is a rice with a beautiful bottom crust that gets flipped over and is just delicious to dig into. So let's get cooking. So to start our Fesenjan, we are going to be beginning with walnuts, and we're going to start by crushing them down into individual bits. My preferred instrument to do that is the back of my knife. But to keep them from going and spreading all over the place, we're going to wrap them in a bag first. You could also use something like a rolling pin or any really hard instrument. You could even use an onion if you wanted to really smack down on them. So by crushing it with my knife and then the rolling pin, I'm able to break down the walnuts into pieces that are no bigger than a pomegranate seed. That way it'll be able to integrate with the rest of the Fesenjan and not have any weird differentiating texture to the rest of the meal. So we're going to begin by roasting this. There's a variety of different oils that I can choose from, none of it really perfect. Grapeseed oil might be the more accurate, more historically accurate oil to use. Grape seeds, of course, are available as a side product of the wine producing process. So we're just going to put enough olive oil to coat the bottom of the pan, just so things don't stick. It's generally a good notion when you're using stainless steel. Walnuts do have oil of their own as well that will be contributing to the oil that's in the dish. And I already can smell the roasting walnut smells, and it's terrific. I've also pulled out the spices that we will be using today, but let's start on the onions as the next portion. And we're going to be doing both the Fesenjan in the pot here and the Khoresh Bamieh on the side here in the pan. Both of them are also going to start with an onion, so I can do one for each. And it's important to continue stirring the walnuts. I'm actually going to turn the heat back down a little bit so it doesn't get too out of hand, doesn't start burning while you're roasting them. I had family friends who were Persian growing up, and for Nowruz, which is Persian New Year during the spring equinox, they would invite us over for dinner. And Fesenjan was one of the meals that they regularly made. What they told me is that they would stay up overnight in the process of making the dish just to make sure all the flavors and ingredients could mingle together as long as possible. And I can say for a fact that their dish was magnificent. And if I could just recreate a tenth of what they were able to put together, I'll be very happy today. The first instance of Fesenjan being written in text is in 1881, so not necessarily in the time span of Age of Empires 2, but all the ingredients were already there in Persia, so this is still an honest representation. Next step, we'll be adding the garlic. I will only be adding garlic to the Khoresh Bamieh. I think for the Fesenjan, we're going for slightly different flavors that the garlic doesn't really pair well with. These are each fairly long dishes, as in they cook for quite a while. So you don't have to be too worried about getting all the ingredients in at once, hoping to have dinner ready by the time your dinner guests arrive. They'll understand if everything's just very late and you guys are waiting up until 10 p.m. before you eat. Now the cats on the other hand will not understand, but luckily I don't really cook for them. The walnuts look like they could use a little bit more water. I had the heat maybe a little bit high, so I'm just gonna pour a little bit more in, just allow things to keep from sticking on the bottom. So for spices, we have cinnamon, turmeric, and cardamom. I believe this is the first time we're using cinnamon in any of these recipes. There are different varieties of cinnamon. The ideal one is Ceylon cinnamon, which is also called true cinnamon, and that's from Sri Lanka. But what we often end up with, the cheaper variety, is called cassia cinnamon. So yeah, undetermined on which one this is. They taste fairly similar. It's just that the Ceylon cinnamon does have a slightly nicer taste and is also slightly healthier for you. We're doing about a tablespoon of each, or a little bit less than that. Let's say half a tablespoon of each, because we're not adding that many components to the dish. So all three of them are going into the Fesenjan, and then into the Khoresh, we're just adding the turmeric, which pairs better. Well, turmeric kind of just pairs well with everything that you want to cook, whereas the other spices work a little bit better with the Fesenjan, which is a little bit more of like a sweet and a sour, lighter flavors, a little bit more floral, especially once we add the pomegranate. But before we do that, let's jump to the first trivia question. First trivia question. Which modern chess piece is represented by an elephant in the Iranian precursor to chess called shatranj? I'll give you a moment to think about this. The answer is, of course, the bishop. And you might be wondering, what does an elephant have to do with a bishop? Well, here's the thing. When the chess concept, the board game, arrived to Europe, Europeans had no idea what this thing was. What is this object? What is this piece that has just a general round shape and two pointy parts sticking up? They don't know what an elephant is, but it reminded them of a bishop hat. And another fun fact, the elephant moves diagonally still, as we're used to with the bishop, but it would jump more like the horse, the knight, and it would jump over one square and then land on the second square. So it could only reach 1/8 of the tiles on the board, which I think would make it a little bit weak. And the way I picture this is an elephant has to move like a few, it has 4 feet. It can't just move in every direction like a human can. So I just imagine it like lumbering, and it just takes such big steps that it ends up sideways when it moves. I don't know, you guys can picture it the way you want to picture it. The next item for both these dishes is our aubergine. I have 3 of them. 2 will be going into the Fesenjan, and 1 will be going into the other Khoresh. And I guess I might make it even. Size doesn't matter, we all know that. In previous recipes, I've salted the aubergine before I put them in the dish, but in this case, I'm just going to put them straight in. I don't think that the bitter compounds are going to interfere whatsoever with the overall flavors of these dishes. But I am going to peel the skin on the aubergine that's going to end up in the Khoresh Bamieh. The eggplant in the Khoresh Bamieh is in replacement of tomatoes. I believe I have mentioned before how they're both in the same family. They're both in the Solanaceae, and I believe they're both in the same genus even, Solanum. So they're fairly closely related in terms of fruit. And while they don't have necessarily the same flavor, I think they can, to some extent, work the same way in terms of a culinary sense. The gunpowder empire of the Safavids, which started in 1500, is also partially represented. The reason they're called a gunpowder empire is because the central government had a monopolization on the technology, giving them a massive technological advantage. This is thought to have permitted the central power to control a large area of space, just because anyone who revolts will have to deal with someone that has guns while you just have bows and swords. Ideally, we would be making both of these dishes in pots. However, we will need the pot later to make the Tahdig, the Persian rice. I will be adding in more water periodically just to allow the browning to come off the bottom of the pot or pan. And we're going to add okra next, but first, let's do the second trivia question. Trivia question number 2. What would Persians write on their arrows for good luck before going into battle? What Persians would write on their arrows is the name of their family members or the emperor. So rather than the idea of having a bullet with your name on it, it's more a have someone back home that I'm choosing to fight for. It's much more of a love rather than hate, which I think is a much more powerful incentive to go into battle and fight. The next step in the Khoresh Bamieh is to add the okra. Okra, as you can see, is this like little geometric fruit from the Malvaceae family, the mallow family, and I don't really have much to say about it. If you've never tried it, it's an interesting fruit. We are not going to completely open it up to cook it. We're going to cook it more or less whole. It's supposed to improve the overall texture of the okra. Yeah, I don't really know how to describe okra at the moment, but maybe I'll come back to it once we get to the actual taste testing and rating later. And that's also a little bit too far, so we want to do just before that point to cut it open. There we go, much better on either side. And we just toss it right in. At this point, we can add some liquid to continue cooking our Khoresh. And I'm just going to use water for this part. Just enough to fully cover everything, or mostly cover everything. That looks about right. So the next step is to prepare the star of our show, the pomegranate. So the pomegranate is a fruit that was originally connected to the branch here. This was the flower. You can see all of the anthers that were left over, the part that hold the pollen. And sometimes they split once they really start bursting. The ones in my parents' backyard always split open before they're fully ripe. They just get so big. And these look like they were picked a little bit ahead of time. The way to peel them or to prepare them is to cut open just the top and not even slice all the way through, just enough to break open this outer layer. And then we can figure out where the ribs are, and then we'll split it almost like an orange, splitting it into parts along the ribs. In botanical terms, a pomegranate is considered a berry. That is, it comes from a single flower and forms a fleshy fruit. That's what it takes to be a berry. I think there might be some other considerations, but that's more or less what it takes to become a berry. And sometimes you'll get some mold that forms around where the flower was. That's nothing to worry about unless it really gets deep into the fruit, which is a possibility when they're allowed to fully ripen and split open on the tree. Other berries in botanical terms are cucumbers, bananas, and our friends in this dish, the aubergine. So we can start to see where some of these ribs are in between the sections of seeds. So I'm going to start splitting it open and see where we can go from there. And of course, I'm doing this over a bowl of water. That just helps with the amount of mess that can be produced when you have so many different parts of the fruit all spilling out, and the potential to stain your beautiful clothes. And then it's a process of more or less shaking them and rubbing your fingers along them until they fall out on their own into the bowl. And there we go. We have almost all the pomegranates out now. It does take a bit of work, more than just like coring an apple and slicing it into pieces. But I promise you that the reward is worth it. Pomegranates are one of the healthiest foods. They have so many different micronutrients in them, and they also have been shown to improve gut health. There's these things called biofilms that bacteria in your gut are able to produce to try to stay alive in that somewhat difficult environment to stay alive in. And these bacteria aren't necessarily the good bacteria that you want in your gut. They're nasty ones that can cause you diseases. And pomegranate, something about the pomegranate, which isn't fully understood or known, allows different parts of the body that fights infections to actually get in past those biofilms. This is all making me so hungry. The cinnamon and the cardamom is what I smell the most coming out of the Fesenjan, and of course the eggplant. And the Khoresh Bamieh isn't that aromatic at the moment. I mean, these two spices that are in the Fesenjan just take over the room right now. These pomegranate seeds are not as ripe as they could be, and so they're a little bit more on the bitter side rather than our syrup, which may be a little bit on the sweeter side. This is what we're going to be adding into the Fesenjan as the main flavor component of the pomegranate, and then the seeds themselves will be there to add as garnish and decoration. Each pomegranate molasses, or dressing as it's described in this case, tastes a little bit different, whether it's a little bit sweeter, a little bit more bitter, more fruity. So I would recommend trying it first separately and then adding a little bit at a time to get to the flavor that you're interested in. And you can tell it's very viscous. This one's definitely on the sweeter side out of the different molasses I've tried. So I'm not going to add too much so that the final dish doesn't come out too sweet. I'm thinking about a tablespoon in total is what I'll be adding. While the stews are simmering away, we can do our third trivia question. What was the city Shiraz in Iran renowned for in the 9th century? The beverage was Shiraz wine, though there's no evidence that the grapes used by the Persians back then are the same grapes that are used in Shiraz and Syrah wines in modern times. There are also no wineries in modern Iran following the Iranian revolutions. It was always explicitly forbidden as a part of the no alcohol provision of the Quran, but that rule wasn't necessarily followed back in the Persian Empire. Even after Persian society became part of the Umayyad Caliphate in the 600s, the Iranians continued to drink wine fairly overtly. At least historical texts tell us that they did it more overtly than other Islamic societies at the time. We are going to let our Fesenjan continue cooking on low, but we're going to use this burner instead to start our rice. So we're using 1/4 liter of basmati rice, which would come around to 1 cup in imperial measurements. Instead of doing a 2-to-1 ratio of water, we are simply going to do a 1-to-1 ratio because we don't want to fully cook the rice to completion here. We just want to get it started on its way. So really we're just trying to cover the rice more or less. A variety of Iranian rice that I find quite interesting is called domsia, which means blacktail in Farsi, where each grain of rice has a little area of black pigmentation, almost like a tiny freckle. But overall, they're both long grain rices, so they should come out pretty similar. The main interest in Tahdig is the crusty layer that we're going to form at the bottom of the pot. So it's been about 10 minutes, and we want the rice to be at a point where it's technically edible, but if we were to eat it right now, you would get a 0 out of 10 on the should you serve this to your girlfriend scale. And I think we're right there. So I'm going to take it off the heat, pour out the water, and put in the oil instead. And I'm also going to salt the rice at this point while it's out and accessible, because the finished product we aren't going to want to move around too much. I think salt will help accentuate a lot of the flavors here. So we're going to make sure our rice is well packed in there. There we go. We got our steam hole in the middle. The rice is off the sides. It's ready to cook for another 25 minutes, and it'll just be steaming on about medium heat. So on the electric, it's about a 4 or a 5. We'll adjust as needed. And to cover our top, we are going to take a cloth and just wrap it around the top of the pot, and that ideally will help trap in the steam a little bit better than just the metal on metal kind of poor lid that we have, especially since we have a hole in this lid that allows steam to escape. Now that we're reaching the last stages of cooking, we can do the fourth trivia question. What modern military weapon derives its name from pomegranates? That weapon is a grenade. The French word for pomegranate is pomegranate, which comes from the Latin pomme, which is apple, and grenade, which is seed. So an apple that has many seeds in it. The idea is that the grenade that was produced looked very much like the pomegranate. It's nice and round with this little cap at the top, which is where the pin, and I don't really know grenade terms that well. Fuse, maybe that's the term, would be in there, and the rest would be filled with seeds, or in a grenade, like the weapon would be full of those little fragmentation pieces that would spew everywhere. I would prefer these in my life, personally. Once the rice is done, we are going to be taking a little bit off the top, and we're going to add it to the saffron that I have here with some hot water, and put it in a bowl to mix it up, get all of that rice infused with the flavors of saffron. I think we have it, and I don't think I want to press my luck. It might not be at the perfect level yet, but I think I just want to get in there and get what we have. And the ideal is we're supposed to be able to flip this and it all comes out as one big piece. So I'm going to do a little audible real quick. This plate doesn't quite fit, but I'm hoping it still does the trick. And we kind of got it. Unfortunately, the crusty bit at the bottom didn't want to release. We can see we have some crusty areas on the sides a little bit, so this is going to take a little bit more finessing. And hopefully this can set your expectations of what you can expect the first time you make tahdig. So we're going to add our saffron water over the rice, and you can immediately see once it's not in the dark mortar and pestle how yellow this water has turned. And you can see those saffron threads are still quite red. And we're just going to use it a little bit as like a garnish along the sides. You can make any shape you wanted. You could try to make the Persian emblem with the winged creature that shows up in Age of Empires 2 if you really felt like you had that kind of ability. There we go. X marks the spot where you should dig in. So Abby, what you have in front of you is Fesenjan. You can just call this the eggplant stew. Tahdig, you can just call this the rice, and Khoresh Bamieh. Almost forgot that one, as you could tell, and you can just call that the okra stew. Just to give all the viewers at home a little bit of information, Abby generally calls this brown mush, which doesn't seem appetizing to her. Hopefully with the garnish, it might change her mind. We'll see. I invite you to use the bowl and the spoon to mix and match as you wish. We have crunchy rice that was crunched up at the bottom of the pot. We have the white rice that was also put into the saffron, and that's why it has a different color. So we have all kinds of wonderful color variations at play here. And then of course we have the pistachios and then the pomegranate seeds. I'm wondering if the second spoonful was because you enjoy it or because you're very curious at what these flavors are and you're trying to figure them out.
Yeah, the second one.
Second one, okay.
I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why.
Okay.
Maybe it's the pomegranate.
Seeds? Or just the syrup, molasses?
I think it's probably the molasses syrup. Like it's really strong.
Yeah. Normally it's not this sweet.
I feel like you've made this before and I've liked it.
Okay.
Like,
it was a different syrup. It was the Sada.
Looking at it is bad, but when you've made it before, it usually doesn't taste bad. But this is really strong. Yeah,
I think it comes down to the syrup. You have to really pick out your syrup that you want.
All right, what else is in here?
So that's also eggplant as the base.
Okay.
In modern times, it's using tomatoes instead, but I'm considering eggplant as the precursor to tomatoes in this series for anyone that's in Eurasia who has no access to tomatoes. Homer, what's Abby eating?
Homer.
So the way that I would describe okra is it's 80% asparagus, 20% bell pepper. For someone who's never had okra before, that's roughly the flavors.
I really like okra. What is going on here? It's like too
stringy.
It's real. It's not.
I mean,
a knife is what I need.
Homer, you want to use your claws? Some people would describe okra as slimy. Do you think that's slimy?
Okra can be slimy. Yeah.
Yeah. The reasoning behind cooking okra whole is it reduces how slimy you can get by keeping all the innards contained. But of course, once you get to this part, it becomes a little bit awkward. It's almost like you almost need a fork instead of a spoon, so you can just take a bite of it. All right, Abby, rating time, execution.
You were talking about this, about how it takes a lot longer to like actually prepare this the right way. That's my knowledge that I have of it, and you just cooked it up in like, I don't know, 45 minutes.
An hour and a half, but yeah.
An hour and a half.
So execution score?
5.5.
Okay. Should you serve this to your girlfriend?
I wouldn't eat it.
You are my girlfriend, again. We mentioned this before in the series. So where do you rate this?
this meal as it is.
Yeah, and like other variations that you've had me make, like if you also considered the Fesenjan a little bit better balanced.
Like a 3.
A 3 out of 10. Okay. So there you go. Persians, not Abby's favorite. I did my best, but obviously I'm not the most experienced. You would think I'd be decent at it because it involves starting with onions and garlic, which I'm fairly competent with. But you could see the rice didn't do a perfect job getting the crust on the bottom.
I did like the rice.
The rice was the highlight for you out of this? Okay.
And the pistachios.
The pistachios.
I'll eat these all day.
Okra, I don't think is ever gonna like rock anyone's boat. And the Fesenjan.
You know who has really good okra?
Who? The Chinese?
No, Muzita.
Oh,
in
the
San Diego.
Ethiopian place in San Diego. Shout out, we're not sponsored, but Muzita in San Diego, if you're there.
I think they fry it or something.
Okay.
It's so good.
Maybe when we get to the Ethiopians, we'll just have to copy the recipe. As long as it's historically accurate, because that's numero uno, as they say in Farsi.
Yeah.
So that's it for the Persians. Next week will be the Spanish. We have a few desserts on the menu for next week. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the comments.